Hey, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. I recently did a video about Johnny Clem, the young drummer who reportedly killed a Confederate officer and went on to much public adulation around the northern states and onto a long career in the Army that ended with him being a brigadier general. So I thought that I would talk about another young man who served in the Union Army. And this person pictured here is probably not someone that you're familiar with. His name is Willie Johnston. And if you recognize the medal that he's wearing, it's the Medal of Honor. Let me tell you the story, which goes back to just after the Battle of Malvern Hill on July 1st, 1862, along the peninsula in Virginia. The area around that part of the country had turned into muck and mud due to torrents of rain that fell after the battle. The Union soldiers, who were exhausted from what has become known today as the 7 days battles, they were exhausted, and they pretty much had one more battle on their hands, which was to get from Malvern Hill to the Union Army base at Harrison Landing, about a dozen miles away along the James River. Those who made the roughly a dozen-mile trek remembered it as one of the low points of their service. Wagons and caissons had made the road impassable, leaving the weary soldiers to endure what, by all accounts, was an absolutely miserable march. Many of the men were scarcely able to hold their place as they were trying to put one muddied brogan or boot in front of the other. To lighten the load, they dropped a lot of equipment, muskets, backpacks, whatever was too heavy to carry, they dropped into the mud or by the side of the forests or whatever might count as a road in this long trek to Harrison's Landing. In one of those brigades, the Vermont Brigade, the men suffered about the same as the thousands of other northern men that were in the ranks. That number within the ranks of the Vermont Brigade included a father and a son in the 3rd Vermont Infantry. The father was William H.B. Johnston. He was an English immigrant in his early 40s, enlisting to fight for his adopted country. He was a private in the ranks. His son, the boy pictured here, 11-year-old Willie, had enlisted as a drummer. You can see him here with his drum. Both father and son, Father William and child Willie, they both survived this trek through the mud and the muck, and they arrived at the landing, Harrison's Landing, with the rest of the battered Army of the Potomac. The commander, Major General George B. McClellan, as always, charismatic, sensitive to the sacrifices and the morale, the sagging morale of his soldiers. He ordered a review, a martial review for the 4th of July to get everybody's spirits back up. There's only one problem with McClellan's plan, and that was having music. In that march, that trek to Harrison's Landing, along with the backpacks and the muskets and other equipment that were left in the ooze, or maybe lost to temporary storage in a wagon train, were also the drums. There just wasn't anything to make music on. You couldn't make sounds to march to. In fact, in the division in which the Vermont Brigade belonged, there was 130 drummers by one estimate, and none of them had a drum to play, and left them all behind, except for one young man, Willie Johnston. He somehow managed to hold on to that drum and his drumsticks. There's an unsourced letter that I found attributed to an eyewitness who paints a portrait of what happened. It says the review, that's the July 4th review, and the afternoon was quite a success. The men looked well, their clothes a little shabby, but altogether soldierly and businesslike. The writer added, quote, instead of the usual competing noise of the various drum corps, our little Willie Johnston, made the music for our marching. So one drum for the entire brigade, the entire division. The sound of that single powerful drum beat reverberated throughout the ranks, throughout the corps of officers. In fact, it carried all the way to Washington, D.C. Word of Willie's feat, Willie's drum playing, went all the way to the Secretary of War, Edwin M. Stanton, and he decided that little Willie Johnston should have the Medal of Honor for his gallantry, for saving that drum, and for doing his part to inspire the troops. That Medal of Honor for gallantry was awarded on September 16th, 1863. By this time, Willie was 13 years old, and he remains to this day the youngest U.S. soldier to receive the honor. Not too long after that, in February of 1864, Willie visited the offices of his hometown newspaper. By this time, he was a little bit out of sorts. Sickness and disability had taken a toll to this 13-year-old body. He traveled to that local newspaper called the Caledonian in St. Johnsbury. And according to one of the editors there, he said he proudly but modestly pointed to the medal on his breast, the medal that you see in this photograph. The editor added, "He's a smart, active boy and would make a good soldier." But his health was poor, and he spent the rest of the war in Baltimore as a bandsman in the 20th Veteran Reserve Corps. In fact, that's the uniform he's wearing. Although it looks gray here, it was actually a sky blue color. That was the uniform, the distinctive light blue uniform worn by the Veteran Reserve Corps to distinguish them from the volunteer and national regular army. If you look closely on his cap, you'll see the regimental numbers 20 for the 20th Veteran Reserve Corps. After his service in the VRC, sort of disappears. There's unsubstantiated reports that he attended Norwich University for a time, tried to get into West Point. That apparently didn't work out. Some reports have him serving a stint in the U.S. Navy and as a merchant marine. Fact of the matter is those details haven't exactly surfaced with any certainty. But not beyond that, we don't even know his death date. There's some speculation he lived after 1917. One report has that he passed away in 1941, same year that America became involved in World War II. At any rate, we have this photograph of him to remember his service and remember his that particular service of playing the drum on July 4th, 1862, after the difficulties of the 7-day battle and the torrents of rain and the mud and saving that drum. So thanks for listening. See you on the next episode.